Say smell.
Smell the Bible.
I had the opportunity to read from you from the Tanakh, and now I'm going to read to you from the Mishnah. I'm going to read to you from the iPad, but the text itself comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral law. It used to be, there was the written law, which is the Bible, and then along with the written law were the explanations of the written law, which were called the oral law, and it was always passed down from father to son, from teacher to student, always orally. The reason for that was that nothing gets written down, so that the Torah can be fluid. The Torah, which is supposed to be the way we live our lives, is supposed to be fluid so that it can interact with daily life. No matter, it doesn't make a difference whether it's the time of Moses or the time of the temple or the 21st century. The problem, of course, is after the destruction of the Second Temple, when the Jewish people were going into exile, and the vacuum left by the Jewish people going into exile, by the vacuum left by the Jewish state being destroyed, and the vacuum left of the temple being destroyed, the vacuum left of the exile, the rabbis decided to write down the oral law. The writing down of the oral law, it was compiled into a book called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah shares for us and captures for us certain poignant ideas of life in Eretz Israel before the temple was destroyed. And one of the Mishnah that we're going to read is called the Mishnah of Bikurim. Bikurim is the special mitzvah that the Bible tells the Jewish farmer that he has to bring his first fruits to Eretz Israel. This, what may have been the road that Abraham took Isaac up as a sacrifice, that's probable. What's definite, and again, I'm not one of those tour guides who tell you the Baba Mises. I'm not going to start telling you, oh, this is where Moses stood. I don't believe in that stuff. I can tell you archaeologically, I can tell you academically, this, though, is the road that the pilgrims who would go up to Jerusalem with their bikurim, with their first fruits, would take. In fact, what you're sitting in front of right now is called a millstone. Millstone comes from the Roman word mill, from the mile. Our mile isn't exactly what a mill is, but it's basically the same idea. These were mile markers that would tell you how many more miles you have left to get to Jerusalem. And the Mishnah tells us, Ketzad ma'alim et bikurim, how do they bring the first fruits up? Every city would go up itself as a whole village. They would make their way to Jerusalem. And they would not sleep in the streets of the cities on their way there, but rather they would go into tents that they would make for themselves, and they would sleep on their way. And in the morning, there would be a guard whose job was to wake them up with the words of the Psalms, where it says, "Get up and go on to Zion, to the Lord your God." Those who were close would bring with them figs and dates and grapes. Those who lived farther away would bring raisins with them, dried grapes. And they would have an ox that would go in front of them, and they would decorate that ox, and they would put different types of jewelry on the ox of gold and silver, and put a crown of olive branches on his head. And then there would be someone who would play the flute in front of them. And as they got close to Jerusalem, all the different villages that were in this area that we're standing right now would come out to them to greet them and say, "Welcome, our brothers, a safe passage to Jerusalem. Welcome, our brothers, a safe passage to Jerusalem." And as the flute would play, they would make their way to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount. And as soon as they got to the Temple Mount area, they would get out of the streets and go into the mikvaot, go into the ritual baths, which we're going to see right now. Where you're sitting in front of, ladies and gentlemen, is one of those millstones telling us the way to Yerushalayim. Because even in those days, while most Jews lived outside of Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim was always the heart of every Jew. And therefore that was reminded by the Jews thrice yearly on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. In those days, they didn't go to Florida for Pesach. You went to Yerushalayim for Passover. And you'd go to Yerushalayim, and that was the heart of every Jew. And that's why twice yearly at the Passover Seder, we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim ha'b'niyah, next year in Jerusalem. And of course, on Yom Kippur, at the end of Yom Kippur, as the shofar is blown, we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Where you are right now is on that very road that your ancestors took. Stopped here to talk a little bit to force you to drink water. Can everyone drink water?